They said a quarterback couldn't move sneaker culture like a rapper. They said football didn't translate into street demand unless you had rings, playoff runs, and a decade of dominance behind you. They said the hype around Shedeur Sanders was loud but temporary. Then 50,000 pairs disappeared in 4.2 seconds. Not minutes, not hours, seconds. When Shedeur's birthday edition Nike drop hit the SNKRS app, it didn't just sell out, it overwhelmed the system. Screens lagged, checkout pages froze, carts emptied before confirmation screens could load. By the time most people refreshed their phones, it was already over. 50,000 pairs of the Air DT Max 96 Legendary Edition gone in less time than it takes to read this sentence. And this wasn't a tiny, engineered scarcity play. It wasn't a boutique 3,000-pair collab designed to create illusionary hype. This was national scale, public inventory, real volume. Nike loaded 50,000 units onto the platform and tied the release exactly 24 hours before his 24th birthday. That wasn't random timing, that was strategy. In sneaker culture, speed equals power. The faster something sells out, the louder the message. 4 seconds doesn't happen because people are curious, it happens because they're ready. Accounts pre-saved, payment info locked in, notifications turned on. That's not attention, that's anticipation meeting commitment. Within minutes, resale markets reacted. Prices jumped fast, climbing well beyond retail before most fans even processed the drop. And resale platforms don't move that quickly unless there's confidence behind the demand. Real money follows projected gravity, and gravity doesn't form around empty noise. What made this moment feel different was the context. This didn't come after a Super Bowl run. It wasn't playoff momentum. Shedeur hadn't stacked NFL wins. He hadn't built a decade-long professional resume. And still, the demand moved like he was already a proven franchise cornerstone. That's when the conversation shifted. It stopped being about whether the Sanders spotlight was too loud. It stopped being about draft positioning or pre-draft debates. It became something more uncomfortable for people evaluating from the outside. If this is what the market looks like before a breakout NFL season, what happens if the wins start stacking? Because 4 seconds didn't just clear inventory, it signaled leverage, and buried inside that sellout was more than hype. There were structural implications, contract language, performance triggers, participation mechanics that most fans never saw. This wasn't just a birthday sneaker release, it felt like a declaration, and the league noticed. 50,000 pairs in 4.2 seconds wasn't just impressive, it was a stress test, a real public measurable demand test that nobody could manipulate and nobody could spin. In today's market, hype can be manufactured, bots can inflate numbers, limited inventory can create artificial frenzy, but scale exposes the truth. And Nike didn't go small. They didn't tiptoe into the moment. They loaded 50,000 pairs onto the SNKRS platform and let the market decide. The market answered instantly.
Because when that much product disappears that fast, you're not looking at curiosity clicks, you're looking at conviction. People don't wake up early, preload accounts, and refresh screens for something they're unsure about. That kind of velocity only happens when an audience is already locked in. When the drop hit, it wasn't exploration, it was execution. What made it even louder was what happened next. Within minutes, resale platforms lit up, listings appeared at double and triple retail, and buyers were still circling. Prices didn't hesitate, they climbed. That's not artificial markup fueled by blind excitement. That's secondary validation. Resellers risk real money, and they move fast only when they believe demand will hold. And here's the part that matters most. This wasn't playoff-driven momentum. This wasn't a veteran quarterback riding championship energy. Shedeur Sanders hadn't stacked professional wins. He hadn't carried a franchise through January football. Yet his drop moved faster than most signature releases tied to players with rings. That breaks a narrative. For years, the assumption has been simple. Football players don't dominate sneaker culture unless they're already legends. The blueprint suggested rings first, footwear second. But this drop flipped that sequence. The demand came before the resume. The culture pool came before the statistical proof. That's uncomfortable for traditional thinkers. Because analysts can debate arm angles, front offices can argue about draft positioning, commentators can question sustainability, but demand doesn't argue, it converts, it calculates, it clears inventory, and 4 seconds is a number nobody can twist into opinion. The bigger question now isn't whether Shedeur can sell shoes, that's answered. The real question is scale. If this is the baseline before a breakout NFL season, what happens if the production on Sundays catches up to the power off the field? Because this drop wasn't just proof of excitement, it was proof of gravity, and gravity doesn't fade quietly, it expands. But what most people didn't realize is that this demand test wasn't just cultural, it was financial. And somewhere inside the fine print of his endorsement structure, speed wasn't just symbolic, it was activated. Here's where the story stops being flashy and starts being strategic. The 4-second sellout wasn't just cultural validation, it reportedly activated something deeper inside the contract itself. According to industry chatter and reports circulating among branding insiders, Shedeur's Nike structure may include performance-based clauses tied not to touchdowns but to sell-through velocity. In simple terms, when inventory clears at a specific speed threshold, compensation escalates, and if that's accurate, those 4.2 seconds weren't just symbolic, they were financial. Most rookie endorsement deals are straightforward: a signing bonus, annual payouts, appearances, traditional royalty percentages. But what makes this situation different, at least based on what's been suggested, is the presence of trigger mechanics. Clauses that reward acceleration, clauses that activate when demand crosses a measurable line. And when 50,000 pairs disappear almost instantly, that line isn't just crossed, it's obliterated. That's a different level of leverage.
There are also reports pointing to what insiders describe as an active player trigger. The idea, as it's been explained in business circles, is that once Shedeur steps onto the field for official NFL action, elements of the endorsement valuation adjust upward, not gradually, immediately. While exact figures remain unverified publicly, the rumored structure suggests the valuation doubled once professional eligibility was activated. If true, that's not a bonus, that's a multiplier. And here's why that matters. In the traditional model, athletes prove themselves on the field first, and brand money grows afterward. Performance earns contracts, contracts attract sponsors, sponsors release product, then revenue builds. That's the old timeline. But what happened here flips that rhythm. The infrastructure was already in place, the audience was already primed, the mechanism was already loaded. The drop didn't create leverage, it revealed it. That shifts power quietly. Because when a brand structures participation around measurable market response instead of just athlete appearances, the athlete becomes more than a face, they become a performance engine. Every viral clip matters, every tunnel walk matters, every cultural moment feeds back into the endorsement mechanics. Demand becomes fuel. And the sellout wasn't subtle. It didn't trickle across a few hours, it detonated in seconds. That type of velocity sends a message internally, to executives, to partners, to anyone watching the numbers in real time. It tells them this isn't theoretical, it's convertible. There's also another layer circulating in quiet conversations: revenue participation tied more aggressively to individual merchandise demand. Instead of relying purely on pooled licensing systems, the report suggests Shedeur negotiated terms that align more directly with his personal pull. Again, exact structures aren't confirmed publicly, but the trend toward equity-style participation is clear across modern NIL-influenced athletes. And that's where this becomes uncomfortable, because once one athlete proves that velocity can trigger value, others start paying attention. Agents start asking different questions, prospects start pushing for participation instead of flat guarantees. The template begins to shift, not loudly, not rebelliously, strategically. 4 seconds didn't just move sneakers. If the reported clauses are accurate, they activated escalators, they validated projections, they proved market gravity in a language brands understand best: measurable response.
But this didn't begin in the NFL. The blueprint was built much earlier. And to understand how this level of leverage even became possible, you have to rewind to the NIL era, when most prospects were still thinking about draft boards and Shedeur was thinking about architecture. For decades, the rookie blueprint in the National Football League has been predictable. You get drafted, you sign the scale contract, you enter the centralized licensing system. Jersey revenue flows into pooled structures, percentages are standardized. Individual leverage comes later, after Pro Bowls, playoff runs, maybe championships. The system is clean, controlled, and uniform. Shedeur Sanders didn't break that system. He stepped around its limitations. What makes this moment disruptive isn't rebellion, it's refinement. Reports and insider discussions suggest his endorsement architecture with Nike wasn't built on a simple flat check plus appearance.
Bonuses. It was structured to scale with momentum, participation elements, acceleration mechanics, potential upside tied directly to measurable demand. That's not standard rookie territory. Because default percentages exist for a reason. They protect predictability. They maintain uniformity across locker rooms. They keep negotiations from spiraling into chaos. But uniformity doesn't always reward individual gravity. And in a digital era where attention is quantifiable, gravity is measurable in real time. That's the real shift. Traditionally, draft position dictated earning ceilings early. Slide in the draft, and your financial upside reflects that perception. But brand power doesn't always follow scouting reports. Social metrics don't care about combine results. Cultural poll doesn't wait for depth charts to settle. While analysts debated Shedeur's draft trajectory, his brand engine was already operating independently. And once you prove your personal demand can generate revenue at scale, the conversation changes. Why accept pooled percentages if your individual jersey, your signature product, your digital presence are outperforming the baseline? Why rely on system averages when your numbers are moving markets in seconds? That's where default percentages start feeling outdated. It doesn't mean the structure collapses, it means it evolves. Because once an athlete demonstrates they can drive independent revenue engines, sneakers, merchandise, global audience engagement, they're no longer just participants in the machine, they become co-pilots of it. That concept makes traditional power centers uncomfortable, even if nobody says it out loud. The NFL has historically thrived on centralized strength, group licensing models, collective bargaining clarity, controlled scalability. But what happens when a rookie, before becoming a full-time starter, negotiates mechanisms that align earnings directly with demand velocity? What happens when performance isn't the only multiplier anymore? That's when templates begin to stretch. It's important to be clear here. There's no public evidence that Shedeur violated any league mechanisms. There's no dramatic confrontation, no system-breaking theatrics. What happened appears cleaner than that. Strategic, measured. He didn't campaign for different treatment, he positioned for it. And once positioning replaces waiting, leverage accelerates. Now young prospects are watching, NIL stars entering the league or studying, agents are reevaluating language inside endorsement discussions. Because if one athlete can secure participation-style upside before stacking professional wins, the next one will ask for the same blueprint. That's how industry shifts start, quietly, efficiently, without press conferences. And the most disruptive part of all, this foundation wasn't built after draft night, it was built before it. Long before the league evaluated him on Sundays, the architecture was already in place, which means the real power move didn't begin in the NFL at all.
Long before draft analysts debated his ceiling, and long before depth charts became a conversation, Shedeur Sanders was already building something most prospects never think about: infrastructure. The real leverage didn't begin when he stepped onto an NFL field, it began during the NIL era, when college athletes were finally allowed to monetize their name, image, and likeness. While many players treated NIL as short-term opportunity money, Shedeur approached it like venture capital. That difference matters. During the early NIL wave, most deals were transactional: appearances, social posts, local sponsorships, quick checks tied to short attention cycles.
But Shedeur's move was different. He aligned early with a global brand powerhouse instead of stacking fragmented endorsements. It wasn't about squeezing immediate payouts, it was about long-term positioning. He wasn't asking, how much can I make right now? He was asking, how much control can I build before I turn pro? That mindset flipped the timeline. Traditionally, players wait for professional validation. They enter the league, they perform, then global endorsements follow. But Shedeur secured brand alignment before any scouting report could define him. He entered the draft process already carrying established leverage, already operating inside a national marketing ecosystem, already connected to distribution channels that most rookies spend years trying to access. And because NIL allowed him to monetize early, he didn't step into the draft as a blank slate. He stepped in with data, engagement metrics, audience loyalty, proven conversion numbers. That's powerful during negotiation. When discussions move beyond potential and into performance-based projections, having measurable traction changes tone. He didn't need to hope brands would invest post-draft. He walked into the league with an ecosystem in motion. That's what digital native athletes understand instinctively. Influence doesn't live on cable broadcasts anymore. It lives on phones. It lives on social feeds. It lives in direct-to-consumer attention loops. And Shedeur's audience wasn't waiting for Sunday highlights to engage. They were already invested in his journey through training clips, lifestyle moments, tunnel fits, and cultural storytelling that made fans feel connected long before kickoff. That pre-league audience became leverage capital. Because when brands evaluate modern athletes, they're not just analyzing arm strength or touchdown projections, they're analyzing conversion ability. How many people move when this person moves? How many wallets open when this person launches product? NIL allowed Shedeur to answer those questions before becoming a professional. That's why the transition into the league didn't feel like a starting point. It felt like a continuation. By the time draft debates surfaced and analysts questioned long-term fit, the brand engine was already calibrated. The foundation was built, the distribution structure was activated. The loyalty wasn't speculative, it was measurable. And here's the strategic edge. Early alignment means early trust. When a global brand invests during the college phase, they aren't just backing talent, they're backing trajectory. That belief compounds. It evolves from sponsorship into partnership language. And once partnership enters the discussion, so does participation. That's how default percentages start losing their dominance, not through protest, through preparation. The NIL era gave athletes permission to monetize. Shedeur used it to architect. While others were negotiating short-term relevance, he was designing long-term leverage. And when the league finally became official, he didn't walk in hoping for power. From a distance, it looked like a sneaker release. Up close, it felt like a statement. The Air DT Max 96 Legendary Edition wasn't built as a casual player exclusive with a name stitched on the side. It was layered with intent. Every visual choice carried narrative weight. This wasn't about matching a uniform, it was about matching identity. The colorway leaned directly into Cleveland tones, deep browns, striking orange hits, a clean white foundation that made the overlays pop under stadium lighting and social media flashes alike. It wasn't subtle, and it wasn't supposed to be. The palette spoke franchise identity without needing a logo scream. Under tunnel walk cameras, it hit. In slow-motion Instagram reels, it registered instantly. The shoe was engineered for performance, yes, but just as strategically for culture. Then came the detail that sent social media into overdrive. Stamped across the outsole, repeating money signs. Bold, impossible to ignore. A quarterback literally walking on currency symbols. That's not accidental design, that's messaging. It signals awareness, it signals confidence. It tells anyone watching that value isn't something being requested, it's something being recognized. Design becomes language when used like that. And it didn't stop there. On the heel tab sat two words, Pro 1. Cleanly placed, almost understated compared to the outsole symbolism. But those two words carry weight. They reference the narrative critics leaned on early, the idea that he was just prime son, just benefiting from legacy, just occupying space created by someone else. Pro 1 reframes that conversation. It centers individual identity. It implies self-definition inside inherited spotlight. That's not decoration, that's narrative control. The timing amplified everything. Dropping the shoe exactly 24 hours before his 24th birthday wasn't just clever marketing symmetry, it converted a personal milestone into a brand event. Fans weren't just buying sneakers, they were participating in a moment, a celebration that felt aligned, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Modern buyers don't just purchase product, they purchase story. They purchase association. When design aligns with personality, calm confidence, visible ambition, controlled intensity, conversion becomes natural. The shoe didn't feel like merchandise, it felt like extension. And that alignment is difficult to fake, because if the symbolism doesn't match the persona, the audience senses it immediately. But this release felt cohesive. The confidence in interviews mirrored the bold outsole. The Cleveland palette mirrored franchise commitment. The Pro 1 stitching mirrored the quiet answer to legacy questions. Product and personality moved in sync.
That's when fashion crosses into messaging, when footwear stops being apparel and starts being thesis statement. And when a design communicates leverage without saying a word, it amplifies everything happening behind the scenes. But the shoe alone wasn't the power move. It was what happened when people showed up in person, when the drop became physical, social, almost cinematic, that pushed this from commerce into culture. The digital sellout was explosive, but what happened in person made it undeniable. This wasn't just an upload and refresh release. Nike staged a moment, a physical anchor to match the online frenzy. And when the doors opened, it stopped feeling like retail and started feeling like a movement forming in real time. By sunrise, lines were already wrapped around the block. Not casual foot traffic, not curious shoppers. People showed up early, phones in hand, documenting every second. The energy wasn't transactional, it was anticipatory. Security had to manage crowd flow because the pressure at the entrance was real. That kind of urgency doesn't come from marketing emails, it comes from emotional investment. And that's where this shifted. Because once someone waits hours for a product, they're not behaving like a customer anymore. They're acting like a believer. They're participating in something larger than a purchase. The box becomes secondary, the experience becomes the point. Inside, it wasn't just stacks of inventory and checkout counters. It felt curated, almost archival, a mini exhibition of the journey. Early cleats, symbolic pieces, timeline storytelling that connected college moments to professional aspirations. Fans weren't rushing in and rushing out. They were walking through narrative, taking photos, posting clips, extending the moment beyond the physical space. That's how commerce becomes culture. And the presence of family amplified the authenticity. When someone from the inner circle engages directly with fans, laughing, talking, shaking hands, the environment shifts from corporate rollout to shared celebration. It doesn't feel manufactured, it feels personal. That emotional proximity strengthens loyalty in ways advertising dollars can't replicate. Some buyers didn't walk out with one pair, they walked out with multiple boxes. Not because they were flipping immediately, but because ownership felt symbolic. It felt like buying into a chapter early. When customers feel like early investors rather than passive consumers, momentum compounds. Nike understands this dynamic deeply. A digital sellout proves speed, a live event proves loyalty. When both align, you don't just get sales numbers, you get narrative solidification. You get visual proof of demand that travels far beyond local streets. Social feeds fill, clips circulate, the spectacle multiplies. Significant executives notice that. Because controlled hype can be engineered online, but organic turnout is harder to fake.
When people physically show up before sunrise, that's alignment. When they document their own participation, that's amplification. When they treat the product like memorabilia rather than inventory, that's belief. And belief is exponentially more valuable than buzz. Buzz fades, belief sustains. That's why this launch event mattered beyond aesthetics. It demonstrated that the audience wasn't just watching from a distance, they were willing to invest time, energy, and identity. It turned a product drop into a shared chapter. But as powerful as that looked on the surface, the most strategic effect of this event wasn't the line outside or the photos inside. It was who was watching behind the scenes. Because when emotion converts into measurable revenue at scale, the ripple effect begins. While fans were celebrating the sellout and reposting launch clips, something quieter was unfolding behind closed doors. Agents were studying the structure. Brand executives were running projections. Front offices across the National Football League weren't just seeing a sneaker success story, they were seeing a blueprint. Because once one young quarterback proves he can align demand, participation clauses, and performance triggers before even becoming a full-time starter, the expectation bar shifts for everyone entering behind him. This isn't loud disruption, it's strategic pressure. For decades, the NFL's ecosystem is operated through controlled scalability. Rookie wage scales, centralized licensing pools, predictable endorsement sequencing. Stars earned leverage slowly. First came performance, then came exposure, then came negotiation power. That rhythm maintained order. It protected teams, it protected brand hierarchies. But digital-era athletes don't always follow that rhythm. Now, prospects enter the league with millions of followers, pre-built audiences, personal content channels, and direct-to-consumer pipelines. NIL accelerated that evolution. The moment one athlete demonstrates that pre-league brand gravity can convert into measurable revenue in seconds, the next wave won't ignore it. Young quarterbacks are watching, elite receivers are watching, college stars preparing for the draft are watching. If participation style upside is possible early, why accept strictly standardized back-end percentages? If demand velocity can activate escalators, why not build similar triggers into future negotiations? That's where tension forms. Not public feuds, not dramatic confrontations, quiet recalibration. Ownership groups begin asking sharper questions about brand control. Agents begin pushing for language that mirrors equity dynamics rather than flat guarantees. Apparel companies start competing more aggressively for early alignment during the NIL phase, realizing that waiting until after the draft might mean paying a premium. Shedeur didn't announce a revolution, he optimized within existing frameworks. That's what makes this powerful. There was no system-breaking headline, no rebellious messaging, just clean execution, measurable results, and contract architecture that appears designed for acceleration. And once a blueprint proves profitable, replication follows.
This doesn't weaken the league. In many ways, it modernizes it. The NFL thrives when its stars become global magnets. Independent athlete revenue engines don't subtract from league value, they amplify it. But amplification shifts negotiating leverage. It redistributes weight. Because when players aren't solely dependent on league-generated revenue pools, they negotiate differently. They move with more autonomy. They evaluate partnerships through a lens of ownership rather than exposure. That's the athlete as brand era in real time. It's no longer coming, it's here, and the 4-second sellout acted like a flare signaling that arrival. Executives didn't panic, they analyzed, they reviewed structures, they measured upside. Because quiet revolutions in business rarely arrive with noise, they arrive with numbers. And the numbers forced attention. But for all the structural pressure building underneath the surface, there's one factor that determines whether this ripple turns into lasting change or fades into a brief surge. And that factor doesn't live in boardrooms, it lives on Sundays. Everything we've broken down, the 4.2-second sellout, the reported trigger clauses, the NIL era positioning, the participation mechanics, the cultural turnout, lives off the field. It lives in boardrooms, it lives in design labs, it lives inside apps and resale markets. But the National Football League is still a results business, and results are measured on Sundays. That's the only variable that can multiply everything or stall it. Right now, the infrastructure around Shedeur Sanders looks elite. The brand alignment is sharp, the momentum is real, the audience is engaged, the demand is validated. But football has a way of stripping narratives down to production. Third down conversions, red zone efficiency, late game execution. When the regular season begins, resale prices don't matter. Completion percentages do. And that's where this story becomes high stakes. If Cleveland starts stacking wins and Shedeur delivers in primetime moments, everything accelerates. Every touchdown becomes marketing fuel. Every game-winning drive strengthens negotiation power. Every highlight clip feeds the endorsement engine. Performance doesn't just maintain leverage, it compounds it. That's when sneaker drops evolve into legacy lines. That's when participation structures start looking visionary instead of ambitious. Because sustained success transforms hype into durability. But the inverse is just as real. If production stalls, scrutiny intensifies. Analysts shift from contract structure to value debates. Conversations pivot toward expectation management. That's the weight of building leverage early. When you raise the ceiling before the resume is complete, pressure arrives faster. Prime equity comes with prime accountability. Nike understands that dynamic. They're not betting on one drop, they're betting on trajectory. They're betting on the belief that influence and performance can align at the right moment. Because
when on-field execution matches off-field architecture, you don't just get brand power, you get brand dynasty. And dynasties aren't built on marketing cycles, they're built on wins. That's the final layer of this entire shift. Not the outsole symbolism, not the participation clauses, not the launch spectacle. Wins. Because if Shedeur delivers when the lights are brightest, this won't be remembered as a 4-second sneaker surge. It'll be remembered as the moment a quarterback stepped into the league and redefined what athlete leverage looks like permanently. And if he doesn't, the market recalibrates. That's the reality of the NFL. You can dominate culture, you can dominate commerce, you can dominate headlines, but Sunday decides longevity. Everything is aligned. Now it's about stacking victories and proving that the leverage wasn't just loud, it was earned.